Now, of course, COVID-19 has created a lot of interruptions within our international supply chains, but more in market. And the rise of protectionism has seen New Zealand produce in places of our markets, such as the US and the UK and Europe, under threat. I really enjoy, as I said in the opening, the thought leadership of many of our New Zealand agricultural leaders, and one of my favourites is joining us now, Anna Campbell, the Managing Director of AbacusBio. Firstly, how's the household been over lockdown with your crew?
Pretty interesting, actually. We've got 4 teenagers in here at the moment, 3 of mine and an extra, and we haven't got a particularly big house, so we've had our moments.
Oh, absolutely. And how great is it sharing about these rural cartoons? You could actually sit them down and educate them about foot rot flats.
Yeah, I could.
Dig it out.
And they're at that age, that nice teenage age, where anything that I'm interested in is pretty dumb. So someone else would probably be better to bring that to them.
Like, or tell them to make a TikTok out of that song that's in there.
Oh, yes.
Swinging around the pole.
Yeah, not bad.
A slice of heaven. And I really enjoyed one of your pieces that was published in the Otago Daily Times when you're sort of highlighting some of these trends that actually were around pre-COVID but have probably been heightened or sustained because of it. Could you run us through a few of those thoughts that you've been having?
Yeah, so I mean, a couple are pretty obvious, and what's happening is that smaller food players are getting a real hammering. So the larger food players like the Walmarts and the Amazons are starting to really dominate, and those players that have really good investment in robotics are only going to get better. So it's really interesting then how we might support our smaller players. And then alongside that, there's this big rally call to buy local, which kind of suits New Zealand and it kind of doesn't. So if you think about New Zealand, we're a food exporter, so we want people to be really comfortable buying international, beautiful quality food. And the reality of buying local for most of the people in the world is that they just can't access that food. So within 100 kilometres of where they live. So staple wheat, for example, or staple crops, a third of the world's population live more than 100 kilometres from the nearest staple crops. So we've kind of got this weird thing going on of, buy local, support our small players, but actually local food is not really a reality for the world's food supply.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, what you're seeing there with the processing of meat internally within the US because of COVID, these protocols within the US manufacturing, have you been following them closely as well? It seems really nuts.
Yeah, and it's really, it's quite frightening actually, because I think there are some big animal welfare backlashes happening, and seeing the same in Asia, not so much with food supply, but people concerned about food safety with eating meat. So there's a rise at the moment in people eating plant-based protein. So these are things we have to watch out for, and just keep our, really understand what our place is in this whole future protein space.
But also at the same time, our protein that we do, the real protein for in terms of meat and milk, certainly really ticks these boxes around some immunity factors. Our manuka honey, even our seafood, it's highly nutritiously dense, our venison. When are we going to actually really start to build on this in
nutraceutical kind
That's the word I was looking for.
No, what's really, really encouraging is that, so health and food is one of the big trends that is just going stratospheric. So nutraceutical sales are soaring. Manuka sales have gone up, and so have kiwi fruit sales. I was just reading in the latest Farms Weekly today that came out that kiwi fruit's on the rise. So that's really, really encouraging. And from a New Zealand perspective, I've long said we need to be investing far more in terms of R&D and market support to really hit this food and health space, because I don't think this trend will go away. I think it's been gradually building, and COVID-19 is just absolutely slamming it home. People are really interested in eating whole food that has healthy properties. And so we need to understand what those healthy properties are and convey that to consumers and really celebrate the fact that we have such wonderful production systems. I mean, I would far rather have beef from New Zealand that's raised on beautiful grass-fed, good fatty acid composition hill country than slammed full of grain in a feeding lot. So we've just got to tell this health story on top of the environmental story. I think we're getting better at telling the environmental story, but the health story has got to come now.
Got a couple of questions there, just based off some of the guests we've had on Sarah's Country. Firstly, Steve Pino, part of the SFF Futures Fund with MPI. Do you believe that we are putting enough money into research, applied science, going into the value-add space?
No. I think given that agriculture and food is our greatest export, and with the demise in tourism, it's becoming even more important. We really, really need to support this industry. And if I look back on my journey through science research, a lot of the fundamental research that we're reaping the benefits from now, but it's just not being done anymore. And there's some really simple things around nutrition and health that we're not supporting. And it's, for example, developing clinical trials to look at the impact of some of our high iron meat products and offal products, or and just putting that support behind that, what can be quite very expensive and basic research. So I think we need to re-investigate how we invest in our agricultural R&D.
And also to talking about guests, we had Sir Peter Gluckman on the show last night. What a wise and wonderful man, with lots of amazing opinions and advice around where we should be going, but in particular really focusing on farm systems. So you were bringing up there about grass-fed, but then we get ourselves into a drought situation where feeding grain to our livestock is our only option. And then you look down the barrel of the processing capacity and the backload it's going to have with skinny stock going into winter, and that social media perception of those animals is not going to help. When do you think, and what's needed to actually have some decision making at higher levels rather than just thinking around this?
I hope that this COVID-19 pandemic lights a fire under the decision makers around the importance of food and agri to our country. And I think there has been quite a shift in terms of the public's view of agri, and people realising that agri at the moment is possibly holding our economy together. So I think that will shift things, and I think this view that tourism and some of those industries can carry us through will start to disappear. So I think we should start to see a shift and an appreciation of the journey that farmers have been on, and I would like to think that would lead to more investment for farmers.
But also more collaboration around how we're going to make sure that these integrated farm systems or multi-land use business models, it sounds very flash, but it's actually quite complicated to do.
Yeah, it's actually really exciting though. There's a really great report by an organisation called Coriolis, and it was commissioned by MB, and it came out just prior to COVID-19. And it talks about New Zealand really underutilising our land and thinking more about how, yes, we've got fantastic hill country, but pretty much every hill country farmer will also have a flat area, and how can we potentially utilise that flat area for some higher value or some plant-based protein products, tunnel houses, those kind of things. What more can we do to actually support our farmers to have greater diversity on farm and potentially intensify certain areas, providing we also manage the environmental ramifications of that. So these are the kind of things that I'd really love our government to strategically start investing in.
And AbacusBio, with the vast array of consultants that actually be able to walk alongside the farmer to come up with some of these different business models as well.
Yeah, and farmers appreciate that they need diversity of income as well. And so I think there is a slight shift. We've gone sort of towards every farmer being a specialist. So you have a dairy farmer, you have a crop farmer, you have a horticulturalist. And I think some of the Māori farmers are leading the way in this front, where they are really looking at their whole enterprises and saying, well, what's best for what part of my land, and how can I share resources, how can I share labour, and how can I look at, well, actually I can combine a kiwi fruit orchard with my sheep and beef farm. So this kind of thinking is I think where we need to go.
So you're very positive and optimistic about the next few years, despite the economic fallout?
Yeah, I'm worried. I'm worried about geopolitics and particularly what's happening with the US and China, because we are going to see a lot more protectionism around food, and what will that mean for New Zealand as food exporters. And it is really interesting at the moment with the US gunning for the WHO and Australia also joining in. New Zealand hasn't gunned for the WHO, and I think that's probably very sensible. We want what's happened with COVID-19 in China and in the US and every country. It's happened to be investigated, but we can't afford to get offside with China. They're our biggest food importer. They're hugely important to us, as is wider Asia, and that's where our future is, and that combined with food and health is where we need to be, where we need to be going. So I'm worried, but I'm also optimistic.
Oh, always wonderful to have a chat. We should chat more often. It's Anna Campbell, Managing Director of AbacusBio, with her thoughts there around the COVID-19 recovery for New Zealand and where we should be putting our efforts, certainly in terms of health from our produce that we create.
This is Sarah's Country.